Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Hogue Knives Trauma. So, first off though, before we go any further, I gotta let you know this guy was sent to me by the manufacturer. Hogue Knives reached out to me, said, hey Nick, anything that sounds interesting in our catalog? And I took a look at this, I said, sure, why not? Interesting enough piece. They still sent it along. Nonetheless, I told them as always, I'm gonna talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly. And we do have to assume that this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my best not to let the fact this was provided to me affect the nature or quality of my review. Next thing, let's do some size comparison. What we're going to see here is first off against the Spyderco Delica and the Ontario Rat number 2. This is not a particularly, it's not a particularly ginormous knife, right? It will also put it up against the Ruler right quick here. And what we're going to see is this is coming in under 3.5 inches, pretty uncontroversially. And then finally, I'll put it up against the Spyderco PM2. This is the River's Edge cutlery version. My other one is wearing a fancy set of pants at the moment. So this is Spyderco PM2. And what we see here is that in terms of size in the pocket, we're actually not very far off. But in terms of sharpened blade length, we're actually a little bit more on the Trauma here. So there you go. Next thing, I of course need to let you know that I am not a first responder at all. In fact, if anything, I'm a first complainer. That's my only claim to fame here. And so although this has features that are really designed to be for that crowd, I'm not going to necessarily be able to properly evaluate them in use. I did not pull anybody, I didn't break any glass with the glass breaker, I have not cut any seatbelts with the seatbelt cutter, and I have pulled nobody out of flaming wreckage in my lifetime. So you're going to want to keep that in mind here, and perhaps keep an eye out on the YouTube for other people who might have a more ethos to evaluate those specific things. I'm going to be looking at this as, is this going to be a good everyday carry knife for the rest of your life when you are not actively saving somebody else's, right? So let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting knife. So to start with, on the good side, this is made here in the US of the A. And of course, you know, quality is about effort, not geography, but I love supporting the home team, and it's a great thing to see products being made not so far away from me. So to me, at least, that's a good thing, but, you know, hey, there you go. Next thing, price-wise, this guy is fine. We're $150 for this particular model. It can go up from there, right? If you get like a DLC blade or other kind of options, and get up to about $170 is the most expensive I've seen these. But nonetheless, the price is definitely fine, and it's lower than some of the comparables, so that's a nice thing. Next thing. This little thing right here, I gather, is a tank wrench. This is a thing that will help you open, I think, oxygen tanks, maybe other tanks as well. But that's something that's going to be useful there, and that's not a feature that I've seen elsewhere in these kinds of rescue-focused knives. Maybe I'm wrong. Feel free to point out other ones, but I believe that to be what we got going on there. Next thing. This is a knife that is relatively beefy. What I mean by that is that really this is well built, and it's not quite overbuilt, but it's just like it's very solid, right? It's got nice thick liners. It's got nice thick G10 here. Reasonably thick blade stock. This is a knife that I wouldn't hesitate to use. Like, I don't have any fear that this is going to fail me in an adverse situation. And especially with the full liners, especially with the sliding bar style lock here, which I think is going to work very well. I think they've done a very nice job of making this pretty, you know, beefy and durable. So that's a nice thing, at least in this particular case. Next thing, this is mostly ambidextrous. In terms of the main blade, it is completely ambidextrous because you can flip the clip to either side here. You can access the blade from this stud or from this stud, and the sliding bar lock is accessible from either side. So this is, in the main blade, completely ambidextrous. In terms of the seatbelt holder, this is pretty heavily designed, holder. I mean, I guess you could hold it, but might end up holding two halves. This is more or less designed for the righties. As a lefty, I imagine you could probably train yourself to use the index finger to get it, but this is going to be one of those things where I feel like a right-handed person is going to have a better experience than a lefty. And so it is mostly ambi, but not completely. Next thing, this is going to be a knife that is relatively rust-resistant, right? Because you've got a nice cutter. A nice cutter that is coated on the majority of the blade here. You have the main blade here in N680 steel, which is, by the way, different from N690. An N680 is an alloy which is sort of more specifically designed to be rust resistant, right? It's not one of those that will not rust, but it is definitely one that favors strong rust resistance. And you also have things like coated liners and hardware, which is going to make this guy a lot less vulnerable to rustification. So it's not one of those where you can just throw it in the ocean, then come back in a few weeks, but at the same time, it is going to be a piece that is going to be much more friendly to wet conditions, to rusty conditions, that kind of thing. I can see that being very helpful. Next thing, the blade on this guy is good. It has some flat down at the bottom here, a little bit of belly. It has a tip that is relatively safe, meaning you could, for instance, if you're trying to cut something off of something, you can use it and kind of glide along this bottom tip here, and you're not going to be digging into whatever you use. That can be very nice, and it does have a nice sharpening choil on here. This is actually a very nice little blade, and it is actually reasonably thin behind the edge as well, which I very much appreciate here. Next thing, this has a pretty simple construction overall, right? I mean, if you saw the disassembly, there's really not all that much to it, and, you know, the sliding bar lock is pretty reasonably, you know, it works well. Everything is done remarkably well, and because it is running on phosphor bronze washers, it's going to be a little bit more robust to unpleasant conditions, things like dust and sand and things like that. So I appreciate that in this particular context. And then finally, I gotta say, the strap cutter here is very nicely done. If you watch this assembly, you'll see that there's actually a separate little spring and ball serving as the detent, keeping that guy in there and allowing you to pretty straightforwardly get in there and pop this guy open, not just like having to guide it slowly out. If I'm not holding my wrist at a weird angle on camera. But anyways, the strap cutter is very nicely done. It has a nice detent. It's very sharp, and it does actually have a finger guard right here. This little unsharpened area right here, you can put your finger there, and it's going to be very, very difficult for you to accidentally cut you as you're trying to cut something else. Actually, let me grab something else real quick and see if I can make this a thing. Can I get in here? I think so. I'm doing this the wrong way, but yeah, there we go. What we're seeing is this is pretty easily cut in, you know, doubled over cotton fabric. So, you know, hey, demonstration, live cutting demo, eat your heart out. But anyways, there you go. So the strap cutter is very nicely done with a great detent. So all of that to me is the good. It's got a nice strap cutter, simple, reliable action and build, a good blade. It's rust resistant, mostly ambidextrous, very beefy and durable. It's got the tank wrench on there. The price is fine, and it's made in the States. To me, on the great side, though, is the specialization of the tool, right? This is a tool that seems, at least from my perspective, to be well suited to the task at hand, right? They're making intelligent decisions overall. It's not that they're putting some, you know, big, crazy, you know, blade on this thing that's going to be dangerous, trying to cut, you know, a strap off of somebody or something like that. No, they're using a nice sheep's foot blade here. They're using rust-resistant materials. They put in a nice seatbelt cutter. They've got a glass breaker. They got a tank wrench. It is grippy. It's going to be very difficult to slide up onto this, both because of the texturing here, as well as this kind of enhanced guard area here relative to some of the other options. I feel like they've done a very nice kind of approach here. And then you've got lots of jimping kind of hidden down in here and down in here, as well as back here. This is just not going to go anywhere. And I feel like they've done a nice job of designing this in such a way that it should be, seems pretty optimal for somebody who is in a very specific situation. So I appreciate that they've made something here that is a specialist, that is really aimed at a group of people with a set of specific needs, and provides what I think is going to be a very nice tool for that group of people. I'd rather see specialists any day of the week rather than something that's aiming to be everything to everybody and not doing any of it particularly well. On the bad side, to start with, the disassembly on this guy wasn't particularly amazing. I don't know exactly what was up with it, but it turned out to be just a pain in the neck a little bit. And unfortunately, in the process of trying to get that pivot out, which felt like it had been peened out, I wasn't able to get the centering back to perfect. You can consider that to be a flaw of me, of Nick Shabazz. That's perfectly fine. Maybe this is the only one that had that, or maybe I screwed up in a way that I've not screwed up before. But either way, the disassembly on this guy was a little bit finicky. I'm hoping that's just a QC issue with this very specific knife, but at the same time, that is something, I don't know if you want to keep that in mind or not, but it is a statement. And I wanted to make discuss that, especially in light of the centering there. Next thing, the design on this guy is not particularly unique. Maybe this is a case of convergent evolution, where, you know, the function ends up dictating the form, or maybe they're just doing what works here, but I really do wish that they had played with the format a little bit more. Because even if it does have some advantages, it does feel a little bit derivative. It feels very similar to some of the other options out there in the world there. And so I'd like to see them play with that a little bit more and see, you know, maybe there is something markedly different that could have been done here. I don't know. Next thing, N680 is not the strongest performer in wear resistance, right? It is a steel that is very, very stain resistant, but honestly, I kind of like LC200N a little bit more, right? And that is a steel that is very, like, you're not going to make it rust style thing, and so maybe that would be a nice upgrade down the road here, or, you know, Van X if you want to go fancy about it, but still. Nonetheless, that is definitely, they are sacrificing a little bit of edge holding for the stainlessness there, and I think there are some other better choices if you're going to go that route. Next thing, this guy, you do feel relatively far away from the blade. Gripping it in my normal grip here, you've got about an inch or so, Is that about an inch? Okay, that is about an inch between my fingers and the blade. That can be fine in a lot of situations, but it can also be a little bit frustrating, and it's not the kind of control that I generally want to have. One could argue that it is keeping you away from the blade, and this big guard keeps you from sliding up further, but that is definitely a thing. Next thing, clip on this guy, not super amazing. Be real with you here. It is a very, very thin clip, and although it works, it keeps it in the pocket. It's just, there's not as much beef to it, and it feels a little bit less sort of durable than I'm used to here. It will keep the knife in the pocket, but a large part of that is going to actually be this texture right here. This is a relatively low force clip and a relatively high grab texture. So it's staying in there, but it's doing it for weird reasons. I'd kind of like to see a different clip end up on this guy in the future. Next thing, like I mentioned, strap cutter is not ambidextrous when the rest of the knife could be. Not the end of the world, but if you're a lefty first responder, that might be something you want to keep in mind. Next thing, this is pretty heavy. If I throw this guy in a scale here, what we're going to see is that we get about 3.25 inches of blade, maybe a little bit more. Yeah, someplace in there. And we are coming in here at 4.8 ounces. Now, mind you, they're really overbuilding this a little bit. They've used thick materials. They've thrown an extra strap cutter in there. So I kind of get it, but it is also not the most lightweight choice, and it is also relatively bulky in the pocket, right? If I throw this guy in, next to the Spyderco Delica, we see it's got a fair amount of bulk to it. Hanging down a fair amount. It is also relatively thick, right? This guy is, well, you're going to feel it in your pocket, and that's fine. I don't think it's completely out of line, but you are definitely paying a premium, so to speak, to have the extra thickness here for the strap cutter, to have the extra beefiness, all of those kinds of things. So to me, that's what's bad here, is that it is pretty bulky and heavy in the pocket. The strap cutter is not ambidextrous. The clip is not super amazing. You're a little farther from the blade than I'd like to be. N680 feels like it could be replaced with some of the newer generation stainless steels. The design isn't particularly unique feeling, and the disassembly wasn't super amazing. But that, again, could be a fluke of this particular unit. Final conclusion, I think this is a very interesting knife for a very specific market, right? Oh, wow, that's the conclusion? What a shock! But anyways, this is really well designed, I think, for the needs of first responders. It's made in the States, it's a fine price, good durable build, good rust resistance, good blade, simple action, strap cutter, and it really feels like they've done a good job thinking of the things you would need here. The disassembly wasn't amazing, for whatever that's worth. The design doesn't really clear the orbit particularly well. It feels like a lot of other things out there. N680 is not the most amazing steel choice. You get a little bit further from the blade here. The clip is okay. The strap cutter is not ambidextrous when the rest of the knife really kind of is, and it is big and heavy and it is bulky. Now, again, I will highlight, I am not a first responder. I'm not even a last responder. If I show up, something got real weird. So I don't have a strong use for the kinds of things this is offering. I don't have the ability to test it in the context that it's meant for. So please, feel free to take my review with a grain of salt. But it is well designed for the bits of life that I do understand. In terms of an everyday carry pocket knife, those I feel like I can evaluate because, well, this is working in that particular way. The functions you need, a nice, easy, accessible blade that, works with a decent action, I think that works. And they've created something that is pretty consistent with that as well as with their first responding goal, right? In terms of everyday carry, though, I feel like it is a little bit much. It being big and heavy and having other tools you don't need on here might make this a little bit less than ideal. And it's a steel that's going to put stainlessness above some of the edge retention. So I feel like if you're just looking for a pocket knife, there are better choices at this price, even from Hogue. Like the Ritter, hold on, let me grab that guy. Come here, Ritter. Here you go. Ritter RSK Mark 1 G2, I believe. And there's a bigger version of that. Is going to be not so far from this in price. Little upgrade in steel, a little bit nicer in the pocket, that kind of thing. This is the mini version. But nonetheless, there are going to be other options, even from Hogue, that might be a little bit better if you just need a knife. But if you need this feature set, this will make sense. So, that is something to consider. And if this makes sense for you on duty, I don't think it's a knife that you wouldn't want to carry the rest of the week, right? This could be your one and only pocket knife, provided that some of the damn time you need a strap cutter and a glass breaker and a tank wrench and all the other things this is bringing to the table, right? So, I think that's kind of my take on the everyday carry thing. It'll absolutely work, but but it probably isn't where I'd send you if that's your only need. The closest competitor here actually is going to be a Benchmade Triage, right? Which is a knife that is very similar in a lot of ways, but it has a slightly thicker grind. It doesn't have the tank wrench. It does have a nicer clip to it, but it is 30 to 50 bucks more, depending on the website and depending on the configuration. If I had to choose a rescue-oriented knife right now, I would probably end up going here, honestly, just for the price difference alone. I feel like that is a pretty substantial price drop, and I feel like this is doing things very, very well. Particularly the thinner grind is, at least to me, a great thing. But like I said, ultimately, I don't think there's anybody who's looking at this and going, well, I don't know, maybe I was thinking of doing a Delica, but maybe I'll go with this guy instead, right? There are a lot of options out there in the pocket knife world, but if you're looking for a very specialized tool, if you need what this Trauma has to offer, then I can absolutely see this being a gem for you, and I think you'll find it relatively atraumatic. Okay, anyways, hope this has been interesting. This review doesn't start too much trauma. Okay, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of the day. I'm going to end the video to rescue you from the puns. Thanks! Bye now.